Stop right there. A booming voice barked. Marcus turned to see a uniformed officer sprinting toward him, gun drawn, hands up. Don't move. The cop yelled, his face red with fury. Confused, Marcus raised his hands slowly, the coffee spilling from the cup. The street froze. Bystanders whispered and recorded on their phones. Marcus kept his voice calm, yet firm. There's been a mistake, he said, locking eyes with the officer. I'll decide that, the officer snapped, shoving Marcus against the wall and cuffing him. Marcus knew this situation was about to take a shocking turn. The downtown streets were alive with the hum of city life. Cars honked, footsteps clattered, and street vendors called out their wares. Marcus Reed stepped out of the cafe, his morning coffee in hand, ready to head back to the precinct. The air was crisp, the kind of day that made the city feel electric. Suddenly, a blaring siren pierced the air. Marcus glanced up, confused, as a police cruiser screeched to a halt a few feet away. A burly officer, red-faced and glaring, jumped out, his hand on his holstered weapon. You. Stop right there. The officer barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Marcus froze, instinctively raising his free hand while clutching his coffee with the other. Is there a problem, officer? He asked, his voice calm but tinged with confusion. Drop the act. Hands up. The cop shouted, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Marcus sighed, setting his coffee on the sidewalk and slowly raising both hands. The crowd around them grew, whispers spreading like wildfire. Phones appeared as bystanders started recording. The officer, whose name tag read Daniels, approached with his weapon drawn. You fit the description, he said curtly. Male, black, leather jacket, looks just like you. Marcus frowned. Fit the description? Of what? Quiet. Daniels snapped, grabbing Marcus by the arm and roughly spinning him against the wall. The cuffs clicked into place, cold against Marcus's wrists. Hey! That's unnecessary. A voice shouted from the crowd. Yeah, what's he even done? Another chimed in. Daniels ignored the murmurs. Focused solely on Marcus. You're coming with me, he said, yanking him toward the cruiser. Marcus didn't resist, though frustration bubbled under his calm exterior. Officer, you're making a mistake, he said evenly. Daniels scoffed. We'll see about that. As they reached the cruiser, Marcus turned his head slightly. Check my jacket pocket, he said, his voice steady. Daniels hesitated but reached into the pocket, pulling out a small leather wallet. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the badge and ID inside. The realization hit Daniels like a freight train. His face paled as he stared at the gold detective badge gleaming in the sunlight. You're a cop? Daniels stammered. His grip on Marcus loosening. Detective Reed, Marcus said, his voice firm but calm. Homicide Division. The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs. Someone in the back shouted, he's a detective? Daniels stepped back, visibly shaken. This must be a misunderstanding, he muttered, fumbling with the handcuffs. Marcus flexed his wrists as the cuffs came off, locking eyes with Daniels. You think? Phones captured every moment, ensuring this wasn't just a story for those on the street, it was a story that would spread far beyond this corner. Marcus picked up his coffee from the ground, the cup dented but still intact. He turned to Daniels one last time. We'll talk about this at the station, he said before walking away, leaving the officer to face the glares and whispers of the onlookers. The video spread like wildfire. Uploaded to social media within minutes, the footage of Detective Marcus Reed being wrongfully detained had garnered thousands of views by the time he returned to the precinct. Comments poured in beneath the post. This is unacceptable. A cop mistaking another cop? They just see black and assume the worst. Disgusting. Props to the detective for keeping his cool. I would have lost it. Marcus walked into the station, the usual hum of activity falling to an awkward silence as his colleagues noticed him. The precinct was abuzz with the news, and every officer seemed to have seen the video. Marcus could feel their stares, their whispered conversations barely concealed. "Reed," called Captain Morales from her office door. Her face was stern, but her tone carried an undercurrent of concern. Marcus made his way to her office, closing the door behind him. Morales gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing, his posture rigid. "I've already seen it," she said, tapping her computer screen, which displayed a paused frame of the video. "It's blowing up online." "I didn't ask for it to go viral," Marcus replied. "I just wanted to grab coffee, and now I'm the poster boy for police misconduct." Morales sighed. "Daniels filed a report about the incident. Said you matched the description of a suspect in a nearby robbery." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Matching the description? Black, wearing a leather jacket? That's all it takes?" The captain leaned back in her chair. "It's not right, Marcus. You know that. But we have to address it carefully." Marcus shook his head. "Carefully? That man cuffed me, humiliated me, and had no intention of listening. He only stopped when he saw my badge." There was a knock at the door, and Detective Sarah Carter, Marcus's partner, peeked in. "Sorry to interrupt, but, it's everywhere. The news picked it up." Marcus groaned, running a hand over his face. "Of course they did. They're calling for an investigation into Daniels," Carter added. "Community leaders are already speaking out." Morales nodded. "We'll be holding a press conference this afternoon. Marcus, I need you to decide how you want to handle this. Do you want to speak, or would you rather stay out of the spotlight?" Marcus hesitated. He wasn't one to chase attention, but this was bigger than him. "I'll speak," he said finally. "People need to hear what happened, from me." Later that day, Marcus stood at the podium in front of the precinct, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. He raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "I'm not here to attack anyone," he began. "But what happened to me reflects a bigger issue, a bias that shouldn't exist in law enforcement or anywhere else. No one, not even another officer, should have to prove their humanity before being treated with respect." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Marcus continued, his voice steady. "I'm proud to serve as a detective, but this incident reminded me that we have a long way to go. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with accountability." As he stepped away from the podium, the applause was almost deafening. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and determination. This was no longer just about him. The video had ignited a firestorm, but Marcus knew the real work was only beginning. The press conference had barely ended when Marcus found himself back at his desk, sifting through paperwork and trying to push the morning's events out of his mind. The precinct buzzed around him, but the energy felt different, tense, watchful. His colleagues, though supportive, were clearly uncomfortable with how quickly the situation had spiraled into a public spectacle. Detective Sarah Carter leaned against his desk, her expression serious. "Daniels is being called into internal affairs," she said in a low voice. Marcus looked up, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Already?" Sarah nodded. The video forced their hand. "You know how it is, if it's public, they have to act fast. But here's the kicker, I dug into his record." "What did you find?" Marcus asked, sitting up straighter. Sarah glanced around before pulling a folder from under her arm. "Daniels has a history," she said, dropping the file on the desk. "Several complaints filed against him, excessive force, racial profiling. None of them ever went anywhere, of course." Marcus flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. Each complaint told a similar story. Individuals singled out and mistreated, their voices drowned in bureaucratic silence. "This isn't just about me," Marcus said, closing the folder with a thud. "This is a pattern." Sarah hesitated. "There's more. I talked to a friend in IA. Apparently, Daniel's squad is under an unofficial investigation for questionable practices. Questionable how? Falsifying reports, mishandling evidence, you name it. If they're looking at him, they're probably looking at his whole team. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. So this isn't just one bad cop. This could blow open something much bigger. Sarah nodded. Exactly. And with your situation in the spotlight, they're under more pressure than ever. Before Marcus could respond, Captain Morales appeared at his desk, her face unreadable. "Reed, IA wants to see you. Now." Marcus stood, his pulse quickening. He followed Morales down the hall to a small, stark conference room where two internal affairs officers waited. "Detective Reed, thank you for coming," one of them said, motioning for him to sit. Marcus took a seat, his eyes sharp. "What's this about?" The officer, a man in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, slid a tablet across the table. "We need you to watch this." Marcus pressed play on the screen. The footage was from a body cam, Daniel's body cam. It showed the moments leading up to the confrontation. Daniels had received a call about a robbery suspect but ignored key details from dispatch. The suspect was described as wearing a red hoodie, not a leather jacket. In the video, Daniels muttered to himself, "Bet it's another one of them." Marcus clenched his fists as he watched. The evidence was damning. Daniels had approached him not based on credible suspicion, but on prejudice. The IA officer spoke, breaking the silence. "We wanted you to see this before it becomes part of the investigation. You've been through a lot today, Detective, but we believe this incident could be the catalyst for real change." Marcus stared at the screen, his jaw set. "This isn't over," he said firmly. "No, it's not," the officer agreed. As Marcus left the room, his mind was a storm of thoughts. The revelation about Daniel's bias wasn't just personal, it was systemic. And if Marcus had anything to say about it, the system was about to face a reckoning. The precinct's mood grew heavier by the hour. Marcus could feel the tension in the air as he walked back to his desk. He had barely sat down when Sarah appeared. Her face tight with urgency. "Marcus, you're going to want to see this," she said, holding her phone out to him. On the screen was a news segment, showing the body cam footage that IA had shared with him just an hour ago. The media had gotten hold of it, and the anchors were dissecting every word Daniels had muttered. "Bet it's another one of them," the reporter repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. These words, captured on Officer Daniels' body camera, have sparked outrage across the city and beyond. Marcus handed the phone back to Sarah, his face grim. "This is getting bigger by the minute." "It's not just the media," Sarah said. "The mayor's office called. They want you at a meeting tomorrow. Community leaders, activists, everyone's going to be there." Marcus rubbed his temples. "This is turning into a circus." "It's more than that," Sarah said, her voice softer now. "This is your chance to really make a difference. People are watching, Marcus. They're listening." Before he could respond, Captain Morales approached, her expression unreadable. "Reed, in my office. Now." Marcus followed her, the weight of the day pressing down on him. Inside her office, Morales closed the door and turned to face him. "Daniels has been suspended pending the investigation," she said without preamble. "But that's not why I called you in here." Marcus frowned. "What is it, then?" Morales handed him a stack of files. "IA is digging into Daniels and his entire squad, and they've asked for your cooperation. They think you can help them connect the dots." Marcus flipped through the files. Each one detailed incidents involving Daniels and his team, cases that seemed routine on the surface but had glaring inconsistencies upon closer inspection. "This isn't just about me," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. "This is a pattern, and it's been going on for years." Morales nodded. "That's why we need you. You've got the credibility, Marcus. You've been with this department long enough to know how to navigate the politics, and the public trusts you. If anyone can help bring this to light, it's you. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the enormity of the situation sinking in. I didn't ask for this spotlight, he said finally. I know, Morales replied. But sometimes the spotlight finds you. The question is, what are you going to do with it? That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment, staring at the files spread out on his coffee table. The city skyline glowed through his window, a constant reminder of the people who were now counting on him to speak up, to act. His phone buzzed with a notification. Another video of the incident had gone viral, this one an edited compilation showing Daniel's past complaints alongside the body cam footage. The hashtag Justice for Marcus was trending. Marcus sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. He had always believed in justice, in doing the right thing, but this wasn't how he envisioned his career making an impact. Still, the decision was clear. He couldn't let this opportunity for change slip away. The next day, he walked into the mayor's office with a newfound resolve. This wasn't just about Daniels or even the department. It was about ensuring that no one else had to go through what he had experienced, and Marcus Reed was ready to fight. The meeting at City Hall was packed. Every seat was filled, and people lined the walls. Community leaders, activists, journalists, and concerned citizens had all come to hear about the incident that had sparked citywide outrage. Marcus entered the room flanked by Captain Morales and Sarah. All eyes turned toward him, and a hush fell over the crowd. The mayor, a tall, imposing woman with a commanding presence, stood at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. We're gathered to address an incident that has brought to light troubling questions about bias within our law enforcement. She gestured toward Marcus. Detective Marcus Reed has graciously agreed to share his perspective with us today. Detective, the floor is yours. Marcus walked to the podium, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He scanned the room, taking in the expectant faces before he began. Good evening, he said. His voice steady. I wish I were here under different circumstances, but as you all know, I'm here because of an incident that happened just a few days ago. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I was wrongfully detained by an officer who failed to see me as anything other than a suspect. Not as a man, not as a detective, just a black man in a leather jacket. What's worse is that this isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows such biases to persist. The room erupted into murmurs of agreement. Marcus continued, his voice growing more impassioned. What happened to me was humiliating, but it's nothing compared to what countless others have experienced, people who don't have a badge or a title to shield them. It's for them that I'm standing here today. The crowd burst into applause, but Marcus held up a hand to quiet them. This isn't just about calling out one bad cop. It's about acknowledging a culture that permits these incidents to happen over and over again. And it's about demanding better, not just from our police but from ourselves as a society. As Marcus stepped back, the room erupted into a standing ovation. But the meeting was far from over. One by one, community members stood to share their own experiences. A young mother spoke about her son being stopped and frisked without cause. An elderly man recounted being pulled over for a broken taillight that wasn't broken at all. Each story added to the growing sense of urgency in the room. Toward the end of the meeting, an unexpected voice rang out. May I say something? It was Officer Daniels. The room fell silent as he stood, his face pale and his posture stiff. I made a mistake, Daniels stammered, his voice trembling. I let my biases cloud my judgment, and for that, I'm truly sorry. I know words aren't enough, but I want to do better. I need to do better. The room was stunned. Marcus watched him closely, trying to gauge his sincerity. The mayor stepped in. Thank you for speaking, Officer Daniels. This is a step, but actions speak louder than words. We'll be watching to see if you follow through. As the meeting wrapped up, Marcus felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like real progress was possible. The next day, the city was buzzing with the aftermath of the meeting. News outlets replayed clips of Marcus's speech and the shocking moment when Officer Daniels publicly admitted his guilt. Social media exploded with debates, support for Marcus, and demands for reform. The hashtag Justice for Marcus gained even more momentum, with calls for accountability spreading nationwide. Back at the precinct, Marcus walked in to find an entirely different atmosphere. His colleagues, who had previously given him space, now approached him with words of encouragement. "Powerful speech last night," one officer said, giving him a firm pat on the shoulder. "You really opened some eyes," added another, her expression earnest. Even Captain Morales, usually stoic, called Marcus into her office. "I don't say this often, Reed, but I'm proud of you," she said. "What you did last night took guts." "Thank you, Captain," Marcus replied. "But it's not over yet. The system didn't break overnight, and it's not going to be fixed overnight either." Morales nodded. "Which is why I need you to stay sharp. IA is moving fast on this Daniels investigation, and they're asking for your continued cooperation." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Have they uncovered anything new?" Morales handed him a report. "They found evidence of falsified reports and complaints that were buried. Daniels and his team might be looking at criminal charges." Marcus felt a flicker of satisfaction but tempered it with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. "Good. They need to be held accountable." Morales studied him for a moment. "There's something else. The department's reputation has taken a hit because of all this. The higher-ups are scrambling to do damage control, and they want to put you at the center of their reform efforts." Marcus frowned. "Reform efforts? They're talking about diversity training, community outreach, things that should have been happening all along." Morales explained. "They want you to help lead it." Marcus hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to be the face of their PR campaign." "It's not just PR," Morales said firmly. "This is a chance to make real changes from the inside. Think about it." Later that evening, Marcus found himself sitting on a park bench, watching the sun set over the city skyline. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had spent his entire career believing in the power of justice, but now he understood how deeply the system was flawed. As he stared out at the horizon, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Sarah, you did good, Marcus. The city needs someone like you right now." He smiled faintly and replied, "Thanks, Sarah. Let's hope this isn't just another flash in the pan." Just as he put his phone away, a woman approached him hesitantly. She was middle-aged, with tired eyes but a warm smile. "Detective Reed?" she asked. "Yes," Marcus said, standing. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My son was stopped by the police last year for no reason. He's still scared to walk home alone. Seeing you stand up to them, it means everything to us." Her words hit him like a wave, and for the first time in days, Marcus felt a sense of peace. "Thank you for telling me," he said sincerely. "Things are going to change. I promise." As she walked away, Marcus knew he couldn't stop now. The tide was turning, but the real work was just beginning. The precinct was abuzz with activity the next morning. News of the growing investigation into Daniels and his squad dominated every conversation. Officers who had once turned a blind eye to misconduct were now nervously reviewing their own cases, while others whispered about who might be next under scrutiny. Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing a new batch of reports from internal affairs. Each file told a story of abuse, manipulation, and outright corruption. It was overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't let it deter him. Sarah approached him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, placing one on his desk. "You read my mind," Marcus replied, offering a tired smile. Sarah pulled up a chair. "IA is digging deep. I heard Daniels is already trying to cut a deal." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A deal? What kind of deal?" "He's offering to name others in exchange for leniency," Sarah said. Apparently, he's got dirt on some high-ranking people. Marcus leaned back, processing the information. If that's true, this could blow the lid off the entire department. Sarah nodded. That's why IA wants you to help sift through his claims. They trust you to separate fact from fiction. Before Marcus could respond, Captain Morales called out from her office. Reed, Sarah, in here now. The two detectives exchanged a glance before heading to Morales's office. Inside, Morales looked more serious than usual. She gestured for them to sit. I just got off the phone with IA. They want to move forward with charges against Daniels and his squad, but they're also recommending a full audit of the department. A full audit? Marcus repeated, his tone cautious. Morales nodded. They're looking at everything: cases, promotions, complaints, hiring practices. It's going to get messy. Sarah folded her arms. Messy or not, it's necessary. I agree, Morales said. But it's going to put a target on all of us. Not everyone in this department is going to welcome this level of scrutiny. Marcus leaned forward. If we're serious about reform, we can't back down. This is our chance to clean house. Morales sighed. You're right, but that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I need you both to stay sharp. We're entering uncharted territory here. As the day went on, Marcus found himself reflecting on Morales's words. She was right, there would be pushback. But he was determined to see this through. That evening, Marcus received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, he answered, Detective Reed? A man's voice asked, This is Reed. Who's this? It's Daniels. Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. What do you want? I'm not calling to apologize, Daniels said quickly. But I thought you should know, you're not as untouchable as you think. There are people in this department who don't want things to change, and they're not afraid to get their hands dirty. Marcus's stomach churned, but he kept his voice steady. Is that a threat? Call it a warning, Daniels replied. Watch your back, Reed. The line went dead, leaving Marcus standing in his living room, the phone still pressed to his ear. For the first time since this ordeal began, Marcus felt a flicker of fear. But it was quickly replaced by resolve. If they thought they could scare him into silence, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The morning after Daniel's cryptic call, Marcus arrived at the precinct with a heightened sense of awareness. Every glance, every whispered conversation felt charged with hidden meaning. He knew Daniels wasn't bluffing. There were people in the department who resented the scrutiny and saw Marcus as the cause of their problems. As he settled at his desk, Sarah walked over, her face etched with concern. You look like you barely slept. I didn't, Marcus admitted. Daniels called me last night. Said I wasn't as untouchable as I think. Sarah's eyes widened. That sounds like a threat. Did you report it? Marcus shook his head. Not yet. There's no evidence, and Daniels is already under investigation. He'd deny it. That doesn't mean you should ignore it, Sarah said firmly. If something happens, people need to know where to start looking. Marcus nodded. You're right. I'll document it. Before they could continue, Morales called them into her office. The captain's office was tense. Morales closed the door behind them and gestured for them to sit. We have a situation, she said, placing a file on her desk. Marcus leaned forward. What kind of situation? Morales opened the file, revealing a series of photographs. They showed Marcus walking into his apartment, sitting at a cafe, even jogging in the park. These were sent to me anonymously this morning. Marcus's jaw tightened as he examined the photos. Someone's following me. It looks that way, Morales said. We're trying to trace the sender. But whoever it is covered their tracks well. Sarah's voice was sharp. This is harassment, Captain. Daniels warned Marcus last night, and now this? Someone is trying to intimidate him. Morales nodded grimly. I've already informed IA. They're treating this as part of the larger investigation. But in the meantime, I want you both to be careful. Watch your surroundings, and don't go anywhere alone. Marcus met Morales's gaze. I appreciate the concern, but I'm not going to let this scare me off. If anything, it's proof that we're getting close to something big. That's what worries me, Morales said. People who feel cornered can be dangerous. As the day went on, the tension in the precinct became palpable. Rumors about the photos spread, and Marcus noticed the subtle shift in some of his colleagues' behavior. A few avoided eye contact, while others offered him quiet words of support. That afternoon, Sarah and Marcus reviewed the latest batch of IA findings. They uncovered more evidence of corruption, tampered case files, excessive force complaints that had been buried, and questionable financial transactions linked to certain officers. This is huge, Sarah said, her eyes scanning the documents. If this goes public, it's going to shake the entire department. That's what we need, Marcus replied. A clean slate. As they worked late into the evening, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back off while you still can. Marcus showed it to Sarah, who immediately grabbed her phone. I'm calling IA. This is crossing the line. No, Marcus said, stopping her. Let me handle this. Sarah looked at him in disbelief. Marcus, you can't take this lightly. These people are dangerous. I know, Marcus said. But if they think they can intimidate me into silence, they're wrong. We've come too far to back down now. Later that night, as Marcus drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced in his rearview mirror, noticing the same dark SUV trailing him for several blocks. His pulse quickened, but he maintained his composure. At the next intersection, Marcus abruptly turned down a side street, then another, and another, weaving through the neighborhood until he was sure he had lost the vehicle. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he sat in his car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for his safety. As he stepped into his apartment, he locked the door behind him and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The stakes had never been higher, but Marcus knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to stop. Marcus awoke the next morning to a persistent knocking on his door. Instantly alert, he grabbed his phone before cautiously approaching. Who is it? He called out. It's Sarah, came the familiar voice. Relieved, Marcus unlocked the door to find Sarah standing there, a mix of urgency and concern on her face. Morning, Marcus said, stepping aside to let her in. What's going on? Sarah held up her phone. We need to talk. IA just sent over a report. They traced some of the suspicious activities in Daniel's unit to higher-ups in the department. Marcus's brows furrowed. Higher-ups? How high are we talking? Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, pulling out her laptop. We're talking deputy commissioner level. There are financial discrepancies and evidence of cover-ups linked to people who have been untouchable for years. Marcus joined her. Scanning the documents she displayed. His stomach churned as he saw the names. These were people he had admired when he first joined the force, officers with decades of service, now exposed as complicit in corruption. This explains the threats, Marcus said. They're trying to protect themselves. Sarah nodded. And they'll stop at nothing to keep us quiet. At the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Word had spread about the IA investigation expanding to include senior officers. Marcus noticed the sideways glances and hushed conversations as he and Sarah walked in. Captain Morales called them into her office almost immediately. I just got off the phone with IA, she said. They want us to prepare for potential arrests in the coming days. This thing is about to explode. Do they have enough to move forward? Marcus asked. They believe so, Morales replied. But they're worried about leaks. The moment someone gets wind of this, it could compromise the entire operation. Sarah spoke up. Then we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes. Morales nodded. Agreed. But I need you both to be extremely careful. If anyone in this department finds out you're involved in this, they could retaliate. That evening, Marcus and Sarah met with an IA agent at a neutral location, a small coffee shop on the edge of town. The agent, a middle-aged man named Carter, looked around nervously as they sat down. We've confirmed that Daniels was acting on orders from higher-ups, Carter began, lowering his voice. They used him and his squad to carry out dirty work, intimidation, evidence tampering, you name it. Do we have solid proof? Marcus asked. Carter nodded. Enough to make arrests, but the problem is timing. We need to coordinate everything perfectly, or some of these guys will slip through the cracks. Sarah leaned forward. What can we do to help? Carter hesitated. We need you to keep doing what you're doing, digging through records, interviewing witnesses. But be careful. These people have eyes everywhere. Marcus exchanged a glance with Sarah. We're in this until the end. Later that night, Marcus returned home to find his front door slightly ajar. His heart raced as he stepped inside, his hand instinctively reaching for the small handgun he kept holstered at his side. The living room was in disarray, papers scattered, furniture overturned. Someone had broken in. Marcus quickly checked each room, ensuring no one was still there. Once he was certain the intruder was gone, he called Sarah. I've been hit, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Sarah gasped. Are you okay? I'm fine, Marcus replied. But they went through my stuff. They're sending a message. Call Morales, Sarah urged. We need to escalate this. I will, Marcus said. But this only makes me more determined. If they think they can scare me off, they're wrong. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the precinct with renewed resolve. He met Sarah at her desk, and they got to work, piecing together the final pieces of the puzzle. As they worked, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. The threats were escalating, and the stakes had never been higher. But he knew one thing for certain, the truth was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The precinct was buzzing the next morning. Word had leaked about imminent arrests tied to the IA investigation. Marcus and Sarah exchanged knowing looks as they walked in, both feeling the weight of what was to come. Captain Morales called them into her office. She looked more serious than ever. It's happening today, Morales said. IA will be executing the warrants within the hour. I need you both to stay out of sight until this blows over. Marcus frowned. Captain, we've worked too hard to stand on the sidelines now. Morales held up a hand. I know. But your safety is my priority. The people we're taking down won't go quietly, and I don't want you caught in the crossfire. Sarah nodded reluctantly. We understand, but keep us in the loop. Of course, Morales said. Stay close. As Marcus and Sarah waited in a secure office, they followed live updates on their laptops. IA agents moved swiftly, raiding homes, offices, and storage facilities linked to the corrupt officers. Among those arrested were Daniels and 2 deputy commissioners, their shocked faces plastered across the news. Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. It's finally happening. Sarah smiled. We did it, Marcus. They can't ignore this anymore. Just then, Morales entered the room, her expression a mix of pride and caution. The operation went smoothly. We've got everyone in custody, and the evidence is airtight. Marcus stood. What happens next? Trials, public hearings, the works. Morales said. The department will never be the same, and that's a good thing. You both should be proud. That evening, Marcus returned home to find his living room exactly as he had left it. No signs of threats, no messages left behind. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, "Drinks on me tomorrow." "We deserve it." Marcus chuckled and typed back, "Deal. Thanks for everything, partner." The next morning, Marcus walked into the precinct to find his colleagues clapping. Morales stood at the center, gesturing for him to step forward. "Detective Marcus, your courage and persistence have inspired us all," Morales said. "You stood up for what was right. Even when it wasn't easy. The department owes you a debt of gratitude." The applause grew louder as Marcus nodded humbly. "This wasn't just me. If you were moved by this powerful story of resilience, courage, and justice. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video to show your support for truth and accountability, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories that inspire and challenge perspectives. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of intrigue, suspense, and unforgettable twists. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.